Welcome to the Operation Paragon podcast, where we build men ready, willing, and able to confront life's challenges and win. I'm your host, Gabriel Schickler, and today we are joined by Mitchell Martin, who is a coach that helps men work through addictions, get to the next level, and really reclaim the power and the purpose that we're meant to have in our lives. We have a great show lined up for you today where we discuss the source of your power as a man, the source of addictions and how to break them, human psychology, how discomfort helps you grow, how your environment and specifically artificial light really messes you up, and even a debate on the nature of good and evil. We don't quite align on that point. So if you want to weigh in, let us know who you think is right, who you think is wrong. Maybe we're both idiots. You got a better idea, whatever the case. Drop it in the comments. Let us know. I'd love to see what you guys think. Before we get into it, I just want to let you know that we have an amazing show lined up for you, but it does end a little abruptly. And that's because my phone overheated and wouldn't let me reconnect, which is why the last minute or so, the closing remarks from Mitchell don't have any video. But that being said, let's get into the show. So my first question for you, just to give the audience some kind of context, is your background, how you started working with men, what really led you to decide that this was what you wanted to be doing and the impact that you wanted to be having of all the different things that you could be doing?
Well, my background is in chiropractic. I went to school in Missouri, started to practice with my now wife, where it's funny, we met and like 6 months later we started to practice, and then a couple months later we ended up having a baby. So life was happening in full force then at that time, now that I reflect, where I got into chiropractic because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so it was like a landing spot. But for me, it was always following that internal knowing aspect, that spirit within that we all have. And so that led me there. And then after 4 years, I reached the ceiling because of all the personal things in my life that I wasn't taking responsibility for. So like I was burning the candle at both ends, right? I was coming at my practice from lack. I was trying to force things. I was lone wolfing it. I didn't have a very positive community around me. I didn't have a spiritual practice. I was just trying to grind my way into success or whatever I thought success was. And then I had a really impactful experience for a whole year working with a mentor of mine, Michelle, where my partner and I worked, and she holds what's called containment. So she holds you in this space and leads you to who you really are. And I finally had the space and time to take responsibility, really, for all the things, all the garbage, all the internal garbage that was representing itself externally. And then when I did that, I realized the passion that I really have for helping men. And I realized my gifts. I realized how impactful that I am. I realized how much joy that I can actually feel because I was able to feel, where all my patterns were in numbing, right? So I numbed with pornography, I numbed with drinking, I numbed with gambling, always just in avoidance. I was just this like shadow guy, or I like to say like hiding in plain sight. I didn't really have any course or GPS, and she hit me on course, right? And that was led by my wife being the catalyst for me to enter into that mentorship. So that's where it really all started, really. And then we took a leap of faith and we sold our practice, and we moved to the island of where we are now in Puerto Rico, and we've been here since last January. So where we do, virtual and, kind of like a destination type of experiences that we provide for men and women here. So really all of this was born from me just realizing my disconnects. And I finally took responsibility, which is a big part of my life. It's a big part of my heart, big part of my design. So that's the beginning. That's the inception in a short form.
Interesting. So there's a lot we could expand on in there. One thing you said pretty early on was the reason that you got into, being a chiropractor in the first place was because you didn't know what you wanted to do. And then, like you said, that led to a bunch of self-destructive behaviors. And I think pretty much any man, if he's honest with himself, especially, in the world today where most of our immediate needs are met, there's not that, you need to go outside and plow your field and, milk your cows and everything, or you're just going to straight up starve in the winter. There's not that, that need for survival so much. And so a lot of men just end up drifting. And I think that's one of the hardest things, especially for people of my generation, where someone will come up and say, like I have a brother that's a junior in high school right now. So, he's starting to look into what he wants to do afterward. And of course, at that age, the first question any adult is going to ask you is, where do you think you're going to go to college? And it's like, that implies not only knowing what you want to study, but also knowing what you want to do for the rest of your life. And I think just having that pressure and that burden is a lot. So for any young man that's listening to this, whether he's looking at college, he's through college, 30 years old and just trying to get his life together, what would be those patterns to look for to kind of find your strengths, and what would be the things that you can use to really start to filter out who you really are and what you really want, instead of just running the social script, because that's just kind of what people do?
Yeah, I would say don't be afraid to go against societal norms. Don't be afraid, and really don't care about what people think. It doesn't matter. Like, adults do that. Unconscious adults project what they see for you onto you. And that's not correct. Where a 17-year-old, 16-year-old is still a kid. Like, they're not even fully developed. If neurologically, I think in our society, a lot of the adults, due to how they were brought up in a very structured, regimented, boomer society, they place this structure onto a thing that really doesn't even need structure, because it's already structured. It's already perfect, right? It's God's creation. It's perfect. You don't have to project, all of your shortcomings onto them, where it's like, just let them live, provide them a frame and support, and let them do their thing. Let them play, let them learn, let them screw up. But for them, for the actual, younger generation, it's, don't care what people think. Like, embrace your weirdness, be playful, there's going to be so much of that around you, right? People are going to laugh at you. People are going to make fun of you. And in reality, because I was on the opposite spectrum, I was the one making fun of, and I know how I felt. I was the bully. I was the athlete. I was the jock. I was all of that. And I was doing that because out of fear, out of my own self, out of my own lack of knowing, out of my own stuff. So I would say just innately be yourself, and surround yourself with people that allow you to do that and appreciate you for who you really are, not for who you want to be, because you're not going to have it all figured out. Like, and if you really think about it, life is already figured out. Creation is perfect. You are a part of creation. Direct distinction, or you are in direct connection to the creator. So you're already perfect, where this all talks about the how. When adults, or, your parents or whoever, they're like, what do you want to be when you grow up? You're like, I don't know, man. I'm just trying to do my algebra or whatever.
Yeah.
Where it's like, that implies a lot of the questions of the how, which the how is already figured out. It's already done. All that we need to get in alignment with is the creator, and following the breadcrumbs, which is the what, because it's already laid out for you.
When we first connected, I asked you, what your mission was, your driving force, and you said it was to help men reclaim their roles and dominion over their body, mind, and emotions in order to be able to live from his aspect of being. There's a lot that I want to pick apart there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first question, of course, is, what is that thing that has usurped or removed a man's dominion? I guess after that, is it an individual, personal struggle, or is it a categorical or universal one that every man?
It's a collective struggle. Yeah. It's a collective thing. I don't think it's one thing. I think that's the aspect of the mind. It wants this silver bullet mentality, and I think that's preached to us, that there is just this one thing that's going to save me, where that's all language of being in this drama, where it's always a cumulative aspect of things. There's accumulation of blocks, and if you really could circle everything back, it really has to do with shame. I think the first introduction of shame to a boy, shame and not being able to display himself and who he really is, I think there's a lot there, which is preached in a lot of, Western church, Western society, of, hey, it's not really comfortable to display yourself sexually. And I don't mean in a shadow way. I mean to even really talk about it, because a lot, like, for example, my father never really talked to me about it out of his own shame and guilt that he had for his own pornography addiction. So I think there's a lot of need for really just boiling down to fathers and sons. I think if there's one thing that can create the most impact in our world today, it's relinking that link. Fathers and sons specifically, because the most pathological bond is the mother and son bond sustained. That's what leads to addicts. That's what leads to pornography. That's what leads to all aspects of feeling you're not getting enough, like you're missing something, because you're really missing that father bond, that father aspect. And all that's seen in the psyche, and all that's been studied in the psychological realm via Jung and Freud, and where Freud got stuck at the sexuality piece. For me, the sexuality is a big part, because what is sexuality? It's not this vulgar thing. It's about creation. And the power of a man is in his loins. So where is that? And if you look at from the body perspective, that's more near like the sacral area, which is what supplies the gonads and the testes and all that area, which retraces back to the brain. So for me, it's really about that. It's about reclaiming your ability to create the life that you want instead of giving your seed away. We have so much power in our seed, literal sperm, literal seed, because what you do with your seed is what you do with everything else. How you do one thing is how you do everything. There's so much there in the sexuality realm of men where it's like not really talked about it out of fear of shame, because when I was in my pornography addiction, I was like, oh, I'm the only one. And every guy has that same pattern. It's like, you're not. Where there's so many different avenues that I'm really researching of, okay, there's the psyche realm, there's the body, there's the brain, there's the emotional realm, and it's all connected, in some sort of capacity, where one of the biggest driving factors for the biology piece is the light that we're surrounded with. That's a very simple fix, and not a lot of people want to go there because it's challenging their belief system and it seems almost too simple, because we like to think that problems are really complex, but they're really not. Life and love are in the simplicity, and I'll stand by that. Yeah.
I forget where I heard this, but several months ago, someone, I forget if this was a friend or something I saw online or whatever, somebody brought up the point that we like to overcomplicate things, because then that makes it okay to not achieve it, or to not really bother going after it, because it's just so complicated, it's overwhelming. But if it's just a simple fix, then you have to admit to yourself, like, it's not that I don't know what to do, it's not that I don't know how to do it, it's just that you can't actually bring yourself to commit to whatever that thing is. I am really glad that you brought up sexuality, because to be honest, when I was going through your page, it was a little bit just honestly a little bit uncomfortable at first before I started to kind of get the gist of what you're saying.
I love it.
So there's a lot that I want to dive into here, and I've spoken about porn with a couple of the guests I've had on in the past, and I expect it's going to be a recurring theme going forward, just because it's such a plague in our society today, and it's one of the biggest things that men categorically just struggle with. Like, I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but I'm sure you've seen just the absolutely abhorrent stats on like the average age where you first see it, how many men are like addicted to it, and it's just all. So, but let's start with the sexuality component. So in one of your posts, you said a man's life force comes from his sexual energy, his seed that drives him to create a life of agency, vitality, autonomy, power, union, adventure, purpose, and connection with God and nature. And I thought this was really interesting, because usually when you hear the word sexuality, just culturally, we just think sex and nothing else. But you're actually broadening that out to be a much larger frame or perspective, where it's almost encompassing an individual's being as opposed to just one aspect of it. So can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I love that you brought that one up specifically. If you look back at how different cultures view sexuality, so a lot of cultures, specifically in the East, they have a lot of reverence for, they call it the phallus. They have a lot of reverence for that, and in their aspects, the blood carried spirit. The blood was where God was, right? It's the vital, it's the vitality. That's why when EMTs are like to check his vitals, and it has to do with blood pressure, heart rate, all this stuff, because it is without that, you're not a human, you're a corpse. So whenever the blood would, allow for the penis to be erect, in their aspect, that was God in form. Because what happens after that? Life. You create life with that area of our bodies, and that area of our bodies has been in the shadows and in shame, where in actuality, it's the biggest connecting link to the heart. And so with that, that's how man can create from his heart if he gets back in touch with that area of his body. All men's pelvises are shut off. All men have low back pain. I get really passionate. I might cuss here and there. All men have low back pain. All men's tails are tucked. Not all, but a good amount. Why? Because this most foundation, which man is the foundation and the frame, it's shut off. It's in the shadows via shame. So without that, you're always going to create a life of lack built on shame, unless you actually take responsibility and view it of what has happened in your life. And my mentor would say, everything happens for you, not to you. It happens for you to use. And that's where my life trajectory has always been. It's always been centered around sexuality and the ability to create. Because if you follow that rhythm, right? When God created creation, he said, in the beginning of. So he was implying that something was already here. Where if you really want to look at creation, it's the aspect of co-creation. And we co-create via our sexual energy. If you don't have it, if you're giving it away, then you will never be able to co-create the life that you want. So it's this aspect of reclaiming that. You have to reclaim that. You have to restrain yourself from these earthly pleasures. And our brains and bodies are wired as brakes, not gas. A brake against pleasure. The brain is just an entire braking system. And the more you put on the gas, you're going to squeal your tires because the brakes are going at the same time. You're going to burn out. You're going to burn up. All of our vital energy as men is all centered there. That's why there's this like big testosterone kick, and you have like 60-year-olds like taking testosterone. It's like, bro, it's not going to end well for you. Number two, you can just restrain your seed. You can reclaim that aspect of yourself instead of giving it away. And there's physical ways you give it away. There's emotional ways you give it away. This might make you uncomfortable, but it's like, don't emotionally blow your load, right? If you have a big experience that happens in your life, don't call someone right away and share it. Like, sit with it, contemplate with it, integrate it. Same thing with when you feel the drive or urge to do something sexual, whether it's watching porn or masturbate or something. For me, that's God in form. That's the creative ability that I have coming to me, and it's my responsibility to sit with that, to sit with it and ask what's wanting to be birthed through me, what's wanting to be born through me, instead of feeling, oh, I got to get this away. I can't handle it. I can't handle this power. I can't handle this ecstasy that I'm feeling. So therefore, I need to go to pleasure and give it away. So if you look in all aspects of my work, when I mention the word horny, I mention the word angry. Angry, horny are the same. And if you want to get into it, I've been able to track the two ways that all men go to pornography addiction, the pattern in two ways, every single time. So for me, that's what this is all about. Porn is just the tip of the iceberg, where we have to reclaim that sexual bond, that sexual energy. We have to reclaim that, because that's how we create the lives that we want. And men, that's why man was created before woman. That's why everything after man is in direct response to man, because we have rule and dominion. In order to have rule and dominion, we have to have rule and dominion over our meat suit first. And you can only get for yourself what you give. A man can only love himself as much as he loves his wife, or vice versa, right? Yeah. So for me, it's always boiled back to man. What is man? Man is that positive point where everything is negative or responsive to man. And that's the real power. That's the real responsibility that we have as men.
So if a man's sexuality is centered around his creative ability, where does that draw a distinction between him and women? Obviously, women also have a creative ability. It's just in a different way. So what's that?
Yeah. Well, women are more connected to God than we are because they directly go to the portal. They bring life into the world. So women are more intuitive, women are more spiritual, women are more authentic, where women call men into action. That's the role of a man, right? And as the man gets called into action, then he calls the woman into action. It's this pendulum type of thing, where it's not the old ways of how I grew up, where my father was the man of the house, and my father said so, and my mother was obedient and subservient to my father because he was the man. That's how all of that stuff that I'm saying has been taken, but I don't mean it in that way. I mean, this is a co-creative thing. There aren't roles in marriage. There's not like, okay, you do this and I do this. It's no, we come together in our full embodiment of man and woman, right? And then we come together. So the distinction for me is man trusting his woman and her authentic, intuitive expression. Because women are more intuitive. Women are more closer to God than we are. I firmly believe that.
Yeah.
I think that's why women.
I'm pretty sure.
Why women.
Yeah.
Let me make a connection. Man came from the dust of the earth, right? Woman came from man. But now every man or woman has to come from a woman. Isn't that incredible? There's no other way to get here. If you want to come to this planet, you got to go through that canal of a woman. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah. It is interesting too, because in the, oh my gosh, forgetting who said this, in the Catholic Church though, as I understand it, there are supposed to be more women in heaven than men. And I don't remember which one this was, but I'm pretty sure there was and the audience can fact check me on this if you want, but I'm pretty sure there was a Marian apparition where one of the things Our Lady said was, most men who don't die in childhood are damned for sin of the flesh. It's really interesting. And then another thing that you were saying about that sexual energy reminded me of something I think was in Think and Grow Rich, which I read probably a year or two ago at this point, where one of the things Napoleon Hill talks about is kind of like you're saying, like channeling that energy instead of just like acting on a specific impulse.
Yeah.
Like actually having that introspective element.
Yeah.
So if sexuality kind of guides us in what we're called to be, what do you make of what we would consider to be like disordered sexuality? And
that's a great question.
There's some equivocation there with the definition, but.
Well, I think I know what you're saying. Disordered sexuality is when you think that you are your emotions. You think that you are the urge. Like, let's look at the example of a rider or a jockey and a stallion, right? The jockey isn't the stallion, just as the stallion isn't the jockey. We have to realize that we are the rider of the stallion and we have the reins of the stallion. And that's how your emotions feel. That's how your sexuality feels, especially when you're developing as a boy. That's why the man, the father, is so important to provide the bumpers for a boy's developing sexuality. So he knows how to harness this information, you know? So disordered is when there's no distinction. You become, in Jungian's language, you become more archetypal. You become more of the energy instead of just getting in touch with it.
Yeah.
So that's when you succumb to, like, you are subservient to your own emotions. You are being led by fear. You're being led by anger. There's no distinction. You just respond to every single emotion, right? But we aren't our emotions. We aren't our thought. We can observe them. That means that they aren't ours. There's a separation. There's a being aspect and there's a human aspect. Human being.
Okay.
So disordered, I mean, that's life. That's the chaos of no one having rule and dominion over themselves. No one being willing to take responsibility. It's like, it's the unsexiest thing. It's not sexy to take responsibility. It's not fun, because you got to actually like go to a mirror and like look at yourself, take responsibility for all the things you did, all the things that have happened for you. Finally, take out your garbage.
It's really interesting too. One of the things that we briefly touched on in the episode that I did with Colin was how God operates in paradoxes. And so like one of the most common paradoxes that we see today is the people that kind of deify freedom and make it the thing for which they live really just end up becoming slaves to their own impulses. Whereas like in becoming a father or something, you've accepted duties and responsibilities that maybe make you less like free in one sense, because you don't have, or at least you don't have as much latitude to just do what you want. But at the same time, it's also more freeing in another sense, because it's kind of pursuing that purpose. And
yeah, you have less latitude, but you have more longitude.
Yeah. Also, could you expand on what you're saying about men and women not having roles in a relationship or a marriage? Because one of the like rebuttals to that just comes to mind would be the statistics on single parent households, and both boys and girls that grow up without a father have statistically dramatically greater negative
Absolutely.
results than women. And obviously we'd say like a mother and a father are both important, but I feel like that by itself demonstrates that.
I mean primary roles, like, because that's correct. That's why the father is without, like, when I mean roles, I mean like, okay, the dad goes and works for a paycheck and the mother stays at home with the kids. That's what I mean by roles. That's societal concept.
Okay.
That's what I mean. The mother and the father are the most important co-creative space for their internal nucleus of a family. Yes, the father is the number one need of that household in all aspects of all life. I lost them.
Oh.
So the father is the number one foundational piece there. So if you look at a house, the father is the frame and the foundation of the house. Without the frame and the foundation, the whole house goes kaput.
Yes.
So that's why every issue that we ever face in our existence can be traced back to one question: was the father present? So that's what I mean, though, specifically. Like, a man is more than just a sexual tool and money, and a woman is more than just a housewife, right?
Gotcha.
That's what I mean, because that reinforces a lot of boy patterns which a boy has for his mother, right? The man expects to be gone all day working hard, and he's in love with the image of the woman that he thinks he loves. He gets home and it's a totally different woman, and he's like, because he's actually really in love with his mother and he wants to be mothered. Where there's more balance, right? Like, I'm with my family every single day. I'm present in my daughter's life every day. And the most important time that a man can ever have with his children is alone. You have to spend quality alone time with your son or daughter. The more you do that, the healthier that they will be in life, and the more that you'll set them up for success, especially men with boys.
So you're not saying that there are specific like responsibilities from the individual parents has.
Absolutely.
Viewing it as like just kind of check the box, go to work, or check the box, take care of the kids is shallow and not really.
Extremely shallow, extremely unconscious.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense. I was kind of confused when you first said that, because I was like, oh, that's a very hot.
Yeah. A lot of my words can get confused. So I'm glad that you asked for context.
Yeah. One thing too you've mentioned a few times is kind of that Jungian frame, or Jungian. I don't know how you pronounce it.
Jungian.
Yeah. So my understanding is Jung primarily dealt with the conscious and subconscious mind and the interaction between the two, but I've never actually like read any of his works directly. So could you just explain both for the audience briefly kind of what that philosophy entails?
Yeah, Jung really, he tried to bring constructs to the unconscious, and he called them archetypes. So it's different avenues of expressions of the unconscious that can be tracked through all, folklore and mythology and stories that men created. So, and all that operates within the underpinnings, the underdwellings of the psyche, which is the unconscious mind. They express themselves via our ego, and he framed them into really four main archetypal expressions, which is the king, the warrior, magician, and the lover. So that was a lot of his work. And then his students took it even further, Robert Bly, Robert Moore, Douglas Gillette, people of those sorts, where they primarily practiced in Chicago. But he has fascinating work really to just provide more of a subjective knowing and a experience of why we do the things that we do, and that there's a reason, right? And even you could even get into Joseph Campbell's work on the hero's journey, which is fascinating work. I think you would love Joseph Campbell's work. I don't know if you've already gotten into it, but
I haven't read it, but I'm very familiar with Joseph Campbell. Stories and myth have been one of the primary interests of mine since I was a little kid. Some of my youngest memories are reading fantasy books and playing with little toy soldiers. So
yes, so you would go to town, because we're here to create new stories and new myths. That's why we're here. That's how we grow. That's how creation continues, right? Life and creation is already the most perfect, beautiful song in the world, and all we do is just add verses to it. That's it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the most interesting, well, let me preface this. I say pretty much every show I do is the best show I've done, just because I love having these conversations and I'm always learning something. But I think it was episode 7 or 8, I had this guy named Chris Robertson on, and he is, I don't know if he would fit neatly into a category, but he's pretty much a pagan. And so for me, a Catholic, that's a fascinating discussion. And I've loved the conversations I've had with him since, because he has such a different worldview. But one of the things that he said was that, and he obviously is not Christian. He doesn't really believe that Christ was Jesus, but he does say Christ is the epitome of the Greek hero, kind of in that epic structure. So I just thought that's very interesting with what you're saying. We're trying to tell new stories, but they always follow those same patterns and those same.
It'll always repeat.
Is that, I guess, from what you read, or maybe just in your opinion, is there any way to break that cycle and tell a different story in theory? And
for sure, yeah. I mean, yeah, you can make anything up, but there's nothing new under the sun, right? No matter what we create, it's already been created. If you really think about it, there's nothing new under the sun.
So where do you think our desire to create things comes from, if we're not really coming up with anything?
We're vessels. We're vessels for the Creator. So it's our duty, it's our responsibility to create, to further this experience that we're having here. At least that's my understanding. That's my knowing. To further on this evolution, and I don't mean evolution as in. Let's just touch on that. I think evolution is God's playbook. I have a different understanding there. I think from Genesis 1 till 3 or 4, that's all evolution. It's the playbook right there. And if you just kind of went in here and you just zoomed out and you just expanded, it would say all of that, right? I think it's because we come from, the dust of the earth, mud, it even talks about fish in the water coming to, it's very interesting. So when I talk about evolution, I mean that, and growth, change. I think, development, I think we're here to continue to reach higher states, to be more conscious, really. That's the whole nature of my whole work, just taking unconscious and making it more conscious and aware. The more awareness you have, the more you see who you are not, the more who you can really be who you are.
Yeah.
Which is just an extension of, God.
One of the things that you said to me when we were setting up this conversation, I was asking a little bit about, your background as a chiropractor, and I was asking, kind of what sparked your interest from the physical realm to kind of a more holistic approach. And one of the things that you rightly said was that you've never just been interested in the physical because you can't add up the parts to get the whole. The whole is kind of its own thing.
Yeah.
So with your understanding of, Jung and everything else you've studied, how much, like, for example, the division between the conscious and the subconscious mind, or the different archetypes that he has, things like that, how much of our categorization of things do you think is actually an objective division, and how much is just looking for patterns so we can try to conceptually understand something better? Does that make sense?
Kinda. Rephrase it.
I'm wondering, like, how much of our categorization and separation of things do you think is actually the way the world is, and how much of it is just subjectively trying to understand things? So, for example, one of the things in Catholicism, and I think most other branches of Christianity believe this too, is like, when you die, your soul is separated from your body. So, you lose your five senses, and then you stay as just a soul until the end of time, where everyone gets reunited with their bodies, right? That's always been a very interesting idea for me conceptually, because with our understanding, it's very hard to say where, for example, the spiritual ends and the physical begins, because everything in the human person is so deeply intertwined. And that's why death is so terrifying to us, and why in stories, you get zombies, which is a body without a soul, or you get ghosts, which is a soul without a body. We're like, we view that division as inherently unnatural, and there's something just instinctively wrong with it. And so one of the things that I've just been kind of puzzling through in my own life is, like, for example, how much of our reactions to things is actually a matter of our will, and how much of it is just chemicals in our brain. Like, so does that kind of make sense? I don't know if I'm really putting this well.
No, I think it's both. I think it's, in a roundabout way, both. Because, what came first, the chicken or the egg? You're gonna have neurochemical reactions, right? But we're more than just a body and a brain. You have the psyche realm, you have soul, you have spirit, you have energy, where science will say energy, religion will say God. I think they're synonymous. I think they're the same, because energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So where does it go? Right? I have no idea. I don't think we're meant to know. I think if we knew, we would, like, screw it up, because that's what we do. That's why we're here, to make mistakes and learn. That's why that pattern exists. That's why this is a big concept too. Mothers and fathers are meant to fail you. They are. They're meant to fail in different capacities, different states and stages, so that way you can learn. And I think when you talk about otherworldly things, like that, I don't know. I think because it challenges our belief systems. I think the less open you are, the more concrete you become. Where I've experienced other spiritual things, happenings of that nature. Not a zombie, but I think the term zombie is very prevalent today. I think a lot of millions of people are zombies that can be easily controlled by the blue light in their phones or the artificial light in their homes. I think there's a lot of research. There's a lot of science there that shows that you become more easily controlled. You have less rule and dominion over your creation. So, I think, there's a lot there. I think it boils down to belief system. And are you willing to open your mind versus really opening your heart? Doesn't mean you have to believe it. Just, can you question? Can you contemplate? I love that word, contemplation. Can you, like the whole earth round, flat? It's like, well, what if it was round? What if it was flat? Would that really change a whole lot? Like, I don't know. Like, probably not. But it's interesting. Like, I can't say if it's round or flat because I don't know. I have no idea. I can read someone else's stuff, but that's not mine. Like, I haven't had an experience where I know it's flat. I haven't looked across the edge of the earth, or I haven't, whatever.
It is interesting to me how God deliberately set the world up to require faith, because you physically can't prove everything for yourself. So, like, even if you're not going to believe in the supernatural, like, you do need to have a functional worldview at all. You have to have some belief in first principles, which are, of course, like, core assumptions that can't really be proven logically because they almost supersede it. One
Well,
thing,
I think you're missing something there. You
Mm.
have to have faith, but you have to have action.
Oh, of course,
Faith without action is destruction. So that
yeah, but like,
action is to prove it.
mhm. Well, for example, like one first principle would be like believing that the laws of logic are sound, or like it's kind of like that thing where science can't prove the existence of God because science can only observe specific measurable things in the physical realm, and it can't say why something is. It can just say this happens because X, like X input, Y output.
Yeah.
One thing I was contemplating, I guess to use that word, um, it was either yesterday or the day before, was I was just considering all the different things I want to do with my life, because like I have a bunch of passing interests that I think would be, and just like skills, hobbies, things that I think would be really cool to pick up. So like I've gotten pretty rusty, but I've played the guitar for a few years. I've also gotten rusty at French, but I do speak French, and I was just thinking like, man, it would be so cool to be able to also be fluent in Italian and Spanish and Latin, and maybe just for fun, Chinese and Russian, and and I was thinking like it's almost a gift in a way that we don't have enough time in our lives to do anything near everything that we want to, because that forces us to choose what is most important to us. And what you were saying about co-creating is like figure out who we are and not just doing things on a whim, but because it actually has some sort of deeper significance. So to tie this back to sexuality, unless you have any other comments on that before we move back to one of the things you mentioned earlier that I also wanted to talk about is why, in your opinion, in our society today, discussing sexuality is taboo unless it's talking about the disordered parts, and then it's celebrated. Why do you think that is?
I think because there isn't a willingness to even have an understanding. Because it actually puts the ball back in your court. And you actually have to, you have to realize how powerful you really are. You have to realize that I don't need to play small. It challenges the comfort versus safety. A lot of people live in comfort, not a lot of people live in safety. So I think it's the unwillingness to work through those cobwebs of the taboo, because it's so taboo. It's so like, there's so many cobwebs there. There's so much shadow. There's so much darkness there. And there's a fear of like, you mean I have to like deal with all of this stuff that I did in college, and I have to bring around bring an understanding to that? Yeah, you do. You have to go back. You have to go back and look at how you used your pen to write the story. If I'm going to speak metaphorically there, you have to take responsibility of how you've used it, how you've used your sexuality, to acknowledge your mistakes, which there's really no mistakes in the greater context. I don't believe in good, evil. I believe in the total alignment with God. And when you're not in alignment, you're living off the mark of your own innate God-given design, which is sin. So when you're choosing to be subservient to your urge or your emotions or your thoughts, you're living a life of sin. You're living a life of disconnect, discontent, dissatisfaction. So I think it's the unwillingness to acknowledge it even in the first place, because it's so easy and comfortable to just not, where, oh yeah, we just have sex to make a baby, and then it's very objectified, and there's a lot of misconceptions around it. So, but that's a great question. I think that's a question I always come back to, and then I just kind of let it go, and it's like it'll come. The answer will come, or it won't. Because what we do to ourselves, we do to the collective, and that's how you change the world, is by changing yourself. And I think shame cultures have a big part to play there as well.
Do you
Go ahead.
Do you think there's no utility to shame at all? Like, do you think there's any context where it would be acceptable or be good?
Absolutely. You have to realize there's positive shame and there's negative shame. So shame is just an emotion, right? It's really not good or bad. It's just an emotion where you have to acknowledge shame that you have. So that's in a light aspect. Whether if you live your life in shame, that's living life off the mark of your design. But if you're acknowledging it and you're actually taking steps to address it, whether with a mentor or with a loved one or with your wife or with a friend, that's what this is about. You have to, shame itself is not a negative thing. Shame itself is not a negative thing. It's just an emotion, and you have to address it. And in that's the wound. Every man has a responsibility to address the wound. Whether you want to look at that physically, or you want to look at it, psychically, we have to address the wound, because the wound is where your gifts are. That's the paradox of life, that if you want to succeed, you have to go backwards. You have to retrace. That's a chiropractic philosophy as well. You have to retrace back to go forward into all of the shadow, into all the darkness, right? Into that. Address your shame, address your guilt, address your anger, and address your resentment. Because those are how, if you're living your life that way, that's a block from you and being, from you and spirit, you and God.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on what you said about there not being mistakes? Because, like you said, sin is living out of alignment, which I would consider a mistake. So is that just like a linguistic difference, or like can you just explain that a little bit?
Yeah. How can there be a mistake? That's the question I want you to ponder. How can something be wrong and something be right? Truly.
No, I have an answer for you.
I know. I know you do.
Yeah.
I know you do. Because, for example, I watched pornography, and then I'll give an example for me, and then I'll give another worldly, probably really uncomfortable example. For me, I watched pornography. That caused a lot of disorder in my life. Was it wrong? No. It was something that I was doing. I was utilizing my source energy to do something that was non-productive in my life. Once I addressed that pattern, I found my gifts. I found my deeper understanding of who I am within that. That's why I always went there, to then help other men with that. So if I would have never watched it or gone to it, I would have never learned anything from it. So how can pornography be a mistake if I'm now teaching other men, if I'm now using it? Another example, if you look at Hitler, okay? Hitler, in his mind, he thought he was doing the right thing. He believed with his whole heart, his whole psychotic mind, that he was doing the right thing by killing all those people. So what is right? What is wrong? It's subjective. If it's subjective, then it's not concrete. To him, it was right. To everyone else, it was wrong. Who's right or who's wrong? Right? Yes, you're taking a life, but in the grand scheme of things, how is that really playing out? Right? Look at, you could look at wars, you could look at so many different things. There's always a ripple from that. So something that I've always stuck with me, that my mentor said, everything happens for you. Whether you've been sexually abused, whether there's whatever, right? And I've worked with men who've been sexually abused, multiple. And now they use that story to help other men that have been sexually abused. Or in some sort of capacity, they're doing something with their life in that way. So we're meant to use the things that happen for us. So how can they really be a mistake? How they actually be a mistake is if we don't learn from them. If we keep doing the same thing and expecting the different result. Einstein said that. That's insanity. That's living a life of sin.
So to address the first point you made, I think the difference that we would have there, and you can correct me if I'm wrong.
You're not wrong.
Well, there you go. Um, it it seems like a difference in whether or not you believe that the end can justify the means. Because I would argue, if you look at an act objectively, it is either in alignment with God's created order, or if it is out of alignment, even though good may come from it, because God can always bring good from evil, that does not mean that the evil in itself was good. And then to answer the second point, right, with Hitler, I think there's a very real and necessary distinction between perceived good and actual good. Because I think we would both agree that human perception is going to color our experience of the world, right? So there is necessarily some subjective portion to every life, right?
Right. So that's the point, because it's not a law. It's not concrete. It can wax and wane. It can change.
Well, it's not a human law, but if it's against the order of the world and the universe, it doesn't matter if you perceive it to be good. Now, as far as conscience is concerned, you're less culpable for things that you don't know to be as serious as they are, right? So, like, for example, if you were to grow up in a, let's just say like an Aztec culture or something, that does teach you, hey, human sacrifice is maybe not the coolest thing on the face of the earth. That thing is still objectively wrong, but that's the guilt that someone bears for being involved with that is less because their conscience has been instructed improperly, as opposed to somebody that is, like if we look at the Spaniards, right, that came to Mexico and clashed with the Aztecs, you know, they had been taught to believe like, hey, that's wrong. We shouldn't be sacrificing to pagan gods and tearing people's hearts, things like that. So I mean, it might just be a difference in worldview between the two of us, but I think philosophically, I will agree that evil is not a thing, because it is definitionally a deficiency. But I do think it is a very concrete and a very real thing. And I have no problem saying that I have done great evil in my life from which goods have come. But that doesn't.
And they always will. Every time.
They always will, but that doesn't mean that it would be better if that thing hadn't happened. Or rather, I do think it would be better if I...
Well, you're still bringing the good, better, best back into it. And there's literally no right or wrong here. Literally, there's no perfect answer. There's no right answer. There's no true false. You know, we've been brought up.
I think we'll have to agree to disagree on that, but
good. That's great. No, because it's how do we learn in life? Do we learn by success or failure? Answer. Do we learn by success or failure?
Oh, failure, certainly.
Exactly.
But we fail with the intention of becoming successful. So we have a saying.
Not all the time.
We have a saying that there's no saint without a past, and there's no sinner without a future.
Right.
So that doesn't mean that good can't come of evil, but that doesn't in any way justify the evil having happened.
Maybe. So look at Saul. Didn't Saul like kill someone before he became Paul?
Oh, many people.
Yeah, right.
He was one of the chief persecutors. He was a oh gosh.
Yeah. So if he would have never done that, he would have never became Paul. So how can that be a mistake?
Not as we know him, but he certainly could have become Paul. Like
theoretically, yes.
If the historical thing hadn't happened.
I'm just saying, look at how the story played out. Let's kind of like dumb it down a little bit. Let's get out of our heads and let's get into our hearts here. Stories play out how they are. If A did not happen and B did not happen, you would not get C. So it's the story. It had to happen. I'm not saying it has to justify. I'm just saying it happened. And if it didn't happen, we wouldn't have gotten C due to the story and how it played out. That's the point. So how can there really be a mistake in the greater context? And there's no right or wrong. I'm challenging you to sit with it, because this is how we grow. This is how we evolve as conscious beings, by having conflict. This is why you like to talk to the pagan, because it's a challenge. This is how we grow. It's like, hey, we're not meant to justify everything with our mind. It's all experiential. And I think the more experiences that you have with an open mind and an open heart, it may change the way in which you see things.
Yep.
Or it might not.
I mean, I've had my mind changed many, many times on many, many different topics, but
You're like, I don't know about this one.
yeah. Well, that's the thing is like, I mean, we could go down a whole rabbit hole here with moral philosophy, but I mean, as I understand it, I view evil not as a thing in itself, but as a deficiency or a lack of good. And the reason that we have the option to commit evil is because it would be logically impossible for free will to exist without the option to do evil. Because if you can't do evil, then you also can't do good because your will isn't involved. That's just your default, right? And so, you're talking
about coming with the sins of Adam versus coming impartial and being in full embodiment of your design. Because Christ came with being impartial. He just was. He knew exactly who he was on all aspects of all planes. He could not live out of alignment of his design. He could not. And you're talking about, we're actually here to have a human experience. That's why we're called human beings. We're here to have this dichotomy of choice, where in reality, we really don't have choice, because everything's already figured out. Everything's already done. So someone rapes someone and then they have a baby. Like, why do you think we can? This is a great question that I think about all the time. If someone gets raped or molested, and how and why can they become pregnant from that? As from such an unjust act, can life still be created?
Because
I think
God
that's one of the
good out of evil.
Exactly. So light can be born out of the darkness. So how can that act be fully just seen as a dark thing?
I don't think light can be born out of darkness. I think that light always beats darkness.
But what was here in the beginning? Darkness. What came? Light.
No, it wasn't darkness. It was nothing. Before the world existed, the world didn't exist. So
And there was water.
Darkness and light, as we understand it, did not exist.
Wasn't water here? Well, what is nothing?
It depends on how you interpret that area of scripture. But I mean, if you go into uncaused causes, either something is God and has no beginning and no end and just is the principle of being, or it's a contingent being, in which case it must have a beginning. So,
why do you think God let Adam and Eve be tempted in the garden? Why do you think he let Satan be in the garden? And why do you think Christ was there too? Christ was walking in the garden just as well.
Out of respect for free will. Because we could not have free will if we didn't have the opportunity to exercise it. Again, it would be logically impossible. That doesn't mean that eating the apple was a good thing, although there are Christian hymns that will say things like, oh God, happy the hour, right? Referring to that. Not saying that it was a good thing in itself, but that is the catalyst and reason for which Christ came into the world.
I think Eve chose to have a human experience. I think she chose to birth the human experience by eating the apple. She said, hey, we're going to go have a human experience, and we're going to be kicked out of this garden, and we're going to generate the world. We're going to create the world.
And you don't think that was a mistake?
I don't think that was a mistake.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, that's damned woman for eternity. It's just that one thing. Eve ate the apple. There's a really funny Jeff Foxworthy bit where he paints the scene of like Adam and Eve in the garden, and he's like reenacting Adam looking at Eve, naked and for the first time, and he's like, I'll do whatever you want, baby. Just give me that apple. I think it's so funny.
Well, it's funny. I mean, to go down another theological rabbit hole, the reason that is referred to as the sin of Adam being the one that damned humanity was because Adam was supposed to guard Eve, to protect her. And if you look at that passage, the way it's written, Adam's not like off doing something. He's like standing right next to Eve. So, I mean, the church basically holds that had Adam not cooperated with that, it would have just been Eve. But because Adam, who's the patriarch of the entire human race, cooperated with that and failed to protect Eve, that's what ushered original sin to be passed down from person to person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's just looking at someone to blame. where I don't believe there's no such thing as a visible cause. I think blame and victim, villain, hero, it's all a part of the drama, where there's no cause. That's why there's a causal realm, because there's no such thing as a visible cause. There's no one really to blame. For me, that's different levels of consciousness, different levels of awareness that I feel we can tap into. And I love looking at the creation story. I think it's got so much information there and different ways to look at it. And of course, we're not interpreting ourselves. We're interpreting the spirit. We're interpreting that aspect, without looking at it from a organized dogma, from an organized aspect that has been passed down for me and how I understand it, for control and to keep the man controlled by shaming him. And I think that's why Christ was so against organized religion. That's why he was a heretic, man. He was a badass, man. And I think if we can all get back to that aspect of expressing ourselves, not that we can become Christ. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if we can make steps towards living our lives in devotion to a higher principle, to God, to living our lives in our God-given design, then we will challenge all of these organized status quos that are keeping us easily controlled and allowing us to live without rule and dominion of ourselves, our lineages, our communities, our villages, and just kind of like unlearn a lot of the stuff that we've been taught and programmed out of fear.
I hear half of what you're saying, and I think we're just gonna have to disagree on the other half, because we could do this for like 4 hours and not get anywhere.
I love it. I think we need to sit down and have some coffee.
Good. Yeah, absolutely, man, absolutely. For the audience, the reason that I love having these conversations so much is because I firmly believe that the truth doesn't need to fear investigation, and I don't really believe in sacred cows as such, because I think that any belief that you're totally unwilling to change is more of a delusion or something that you're just like emotionally clinging to. Mm-hmm. But if there's something that can update your worldview or your mindset, that's all for the better, as long as it's in alignment with the truth. So form your own opinions with this, take it how you will, but I'm having fun, man. Awesome. Yeah, so let's get back to pornography and that wound. Mm-hmm. One principle that I've heard is talking about how the devil comes after us and wounds us in the place where we have the potential for our greatest strength, because that's basically the biggest threat to him, right? And so that's very interesting to view just the widespread problem that is pornography through this lens, especially if we connect it to what you were saying earlier about kind of sexuality being the root of a man's power, because that disconnect makes total sense. Like, of course, every man would struggle through this if that's an integral part of his being and how he's meant to show up in the world. So one of the things that you had talked about in post that I saw, you said that a lot of men turn to it when the need to bond and to form real connections isn't being met. So is this instinctive turning to it, is it like a survival mechanism, or what do you think the root of that really is?
Well, I think this aspect of expressing yourself can be passed down epigenetically from sperm to ovum. I think that's how patterns keep continuing until either a man or a woman has the willingness to address them and to completely change the fabrics of their DNA. And so for me, it's at a deep core aspect. For me, it always boils back to shame. Whenever there isn't a place of connection, specifically with son, father, then there will be a need that the child will go to sense control, to sense something, to feel good, to have some sort of pleasure, because he's not getting that. So how my experience went out and how millions of men, this is how it goes. Dad's gone all the time. You spend more time with your mom. The mom then has a higher sympathetic state, meaning she's more stressed because she doesn't have the support from her husband. She only gets monetary support. She doesn't have that connection. So that mother will then project her own lack of connections onto the boy, right? Things, more personal things get shared. Then the boy will feel that. The boy will then feel a sense of shame because he's not big enough, strong enough. He doesn't have the capacity to save his mom. So then what does he do? He then resents the father because he knows in his feeling realm, because a lot of this happens between 0 and 12. So you're all in the body. You're all in the emotions. You feel, oh man, my dad's harming my mom. I don't know what to do anything about it. So I'm going to be angry. So anger is born. Shame, anger are born from a non-healthy capacity. So you hate your dad and you want to save your mom, and all the while you're irritated with your mom because your mom is expressing more of a masculine role because she has to be. She has to, for the sake of her own survival and the survival of her lineage, because the man isn't present. So the boy wants to save his mom. He hates his mom, but he loves his mom all the same. So this is deep into the psyche. And this is written in a lot of stories, and I like to say lore and myths of that's where the stepmother comes in, right? And if you look at pornography, there's a lot of stepmother porn. Why? Stepmother in ancient traditions was known as the shadow mother energy. The shadow mother partners with the tutor, which is this is all in a story called the what is it called? Oh man, I'm blanking on it. But where the shadow mother will partner with the tutor, which is the educational system, to take control of boys, right? And so it's very in the shadow realm of the psyche. So the boy will then go to something that has some sort of aspect of the mother in it because he like hates his mom but wants to be with his mom at the same time. It's really shadowy. It's really taboo. It's really uncomfortable in this area because in actuality, he really just wants to be with his dad. He really just wants that connection. So that's why in my work, we have to go back and explore the connection with the mother to then get to the father. If this is making any sense.
Yeah.
Because you have to go back with who you spent the most time with, who had the biggest impact on your imprintability as a boy. Because if you look at us at that age, we are literally sponges that can be molded and malleable. And how your mom is expressing is how you will express via sexually and monetarily. Because if you have a money wound, you have a sexual wound. It's the same thing. And the brain shows you that. The same place that we get pleasure from erotic imagery is the same exact place that we get joy or pleasure from monetary gain. Same exact place. Why do you think that is? Why do you think casinos exist? Why do you think casinos do so well? Because it's blue lit. It's all about dopamine. It's all about, women who are, half naked, and it's all about money. It's all pleasure, right? So I can't remember your question, but I think I'm alluding to it. It has to do with the higher connection or the more intimate connection that the boy had with his mother because the father was not around. And that's when aspects of really the shadow gets to go to work because the boy doesn't really know what the father does, right? Because he's not around him all the time.
Interesting. Yeah, one of the things that's kind of fascinating to me about how, like you're saying, porn and gambling and things like that just hijack your brain. It kind of reminded me of this one study that some scientific group did years ago, where they were looking at basically how to dupe turkeys into taking things that weren't their offspring into their nests. So one of the natural predators of a turkey is a polecat, right? Which is, just a carnivorous predatory animal, if anyone isn't aware. So the mama turkey will viciously attack a polecat that comes near her or her chicks. And they even had a stuffed polecat that they would like tie to a string and just drag closer to the nest, and the mama turkey would go crazy. But then if they just put a little like sound box that was playing pre-recorded turkey like cheeps basically from the little chicks that like overwrites the mama turkey's defense mechanism. And so she will let this thing that looks like a polecat into the nest as long as it's making the noises that her chicks make. So I wonder if that's kind of a similar principle where like the appeal of porn isn't because we recognize like anything that's actually inherently valuable, but it's more like it's almost hijacking our brains, and like that little dopamine hit or whatever is kind of like overriding the reason of like actually looking at all the angles and saying, yeah, I probably should not let this into the nest. So does that make sense?
I know where you're trying to connect it. I don't think it connects because that's a different part of the brain. Yeah, that's more of the sensory. That's more of the olfactory aspect of. I get what you're saying. I would also ask. I wonder if that study was done outside or if it was done inside. So I wonder if it.
Oh yeah,
if
I don't know that much in detail, but
yeah. I think what this boils down to is why do people gravitate towards it? Why do they allow it into their field? Because it's a coping mechanism. But let's zoom out a little further. What's the ultimate coping mechanism? What does everyone reach to whenever there's a lull in conversation? The phone. The phone.
Yeah.
Porn wasn't really at the rate at it's at now until like the 2000s. What was going on in the 2000s? Technology.
Yeah,
so if you want to blow your mind, go look up Jack Cruz. Go look up his work. Go study his stuff. It'll take you probably 10 to 15 years to get through it all. It's no joke. He's been doing this for 30 years. All centered around light and how we literally just crave light because we come from light. We are beings of light. If you look at the center of our being, what is there? Light. It's written in all aspects of life. So what do we reach to? We go to our now pacifiers, which are our phone, that give us that hit that we need. And I've proved that. That's why the red light glasses exist. Red light glasses exist to filter out the blue. If you don't have the blue light going into your brain, you don't get the hit. You just get normal light. Yeah. Because where in our nature do we ever only see one slice of light? Light is a spectrum. It's a full piece of the pie. It's a full pie, sorry. So where in nature do we only have broken light? In our phones and in our technology. That's not natural. That's not normal.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things you talked about too is how like just exposure to sunlight helped you to overcome that tendency. So can you kind of delve into like more why that functions the way it does?
Yeah. So I'm going to try to simplify this as much as I can because this can go really quantum mechanic.
I'm sure.
We can talk about UVA light and UVB. UVA is more predominant in the morning, where UVB is more predominant during the high aspects of peak sun. So if you look at the brain, our cells, which I'll simply say the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It controls gene function. It controls all functions of our life. It controls our charge. It controls how we show up in the world. And so UVA is important for that engine to regenerate and recharge. So that way we have the expression of vitality, the expression of our charge. UVB, however, it's most important to release the same exact endorphins that get released when we watch pornography. We are programmed and wired to be addicted to the sun. We are programmed and wired to be out in sunlight all hours of the day. So what happens when you look at your phone and that broken light, it's the same pathway. It's the same pathway as you looking at the sun. However, it affects it in more of a heightened state. It's a stressor. This light is meant to stress you out. All artificial light was literally created to have people work more and get stressed, to literally stay awake and work, literally, to create more workers. So this phone is no different. That's why I have a red screen on my phone. That's why I'm outside, because I get all the other aspects of light while I'm looking at my phone. So when you look at this phone, it goes through your eye, which the eye is the brain. There's no distinction between your brain and the eye. The eye is literally a part of your diencephalon, part of your brain, which has so many things connected to it, right? The hypothalamus, anterior, posterior, pituitary. But let's pick on the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is where, guess what's made? Sexual hormones, testosterone, estrogen, all of these things.
Really?
Yes, I'm telling you. This is
that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's why you need to go look at Jack's work, because Jack introduced this to me 4 or 5 years ago, and I started to just literally apply his work into my life. And that's one of the big reasons of why we moved here to the island, because of the sun, because it's lower latitude. I realized how alive I felt here. Come to find out, some of my ancestors are from here, right? I have Indian in my realm. The native Indians of the West came from the Taino Indians of Puerto Rico. So there's a whole distinction, there's a whole connection here. But back to the light. That's where testosterone's made. That's where we release those hormones, okay? So when you're in the UVB light, when that hits your system, the exact same, it's called alpha, beta, gamma, MSH. It's a hormone. It gets released to allow your dopamine levels to just cruise at a normal altitude. Okay? So that we're not meant to go high and low. That's what I alluded to in the beginning of this podcast, how I was living my life in extreme highs and extreme lows. We're meant to just cruise at an altitude of dopamine, which dopamine affects testosterone. Dopamine affects everything. It's how we experience pleasure in the world. So when you look at this artificial light, it does everything in extreme, and it makes you want more. You can't have enough. You're like, God, I need more. But guess what? The more dopamine you make, the more dopamine receptors get destroyed. So it leaves you with a black hole. But when you look at the sun, it's sustained. You make dopamine. You make dopamine by tyrosine and light. So everything always boils back to light. What was there in the beginning? Light. I'm telling you, this is a God story. Pornography disconnects you from God.
That I will agree with.
It's that that simple. And the ingredients for us to return are in nature. That's why we exist, and we are nature. That's why we come from nature. We are no different than nature. We come from the dust of the earth. We are negative or responsive to the sun, and the body and the brain shows that.
Is there any process for like reacclimating to natural light? Because
absolutely, absolutely.
The reason I ask this is I'm just kind of drawing a parallel from what you're saying between this and some people that I knew growing up, and this would be just like kids in my class at school and stuff that had a very artificial diet. They're eating just like a bunch of prepackaged factory stuff. My mom was very big on whole foods, and I had a couple friends that would come over and they wouldn't want to eat any of like the homemade, more natural stuff because like their palate was so shot.
They craved the shit.
Yeah. So is there a parallel between that and what you're talking about with like the blue light kind of addiction, just go, and then...
Well, the more artificial you surround yourself with, the more artificial you become. That's the point. So Jack Cruz has a whole podcast on that, the whole blue light agenda and what that's really about. It's an incredible story. It's 4 hours long. Go look it up. It's on the Danny Jones podcast. And I have such a privilege to learn from him for, over the past 4 or 5 years, just out of my own willingness to apply things. And it was all for free, So that's the thing. It's very simple. It's extremely simple. Light is a spectrum. It operates in the Roy G. Biv aspect. Nowhere in nature do we get a slice. That is unnatural. That makes us more controllable. That makes us more pleasure-centered. That makes us crave it. So, for example, you go to dinner with whoever sets their phone on the table, you innately will be more worried about the phone than you will be that conversation. And you will probably check your phone multiple times while you're there. But if you put it out of mind, out of sight, you won't even think about it. Your conversation will go, because we know what that holds. It holds this feel good thing. So that's like the entryway, the gateway into then pornography, which is a total double down, even heightened, greater sense of dopamine release. So it's like, let's enter the gate. And then once you're in the gate, you're there. It becomes really challenging to get out of that loop. But that's where I lead men through. Like a friend of mine would say, he's like, man, you lead men to the gates of hell. And I'm like, I do, because that's where you have to go.
Huh.
And you have to realize that all of the stuff of who you really are not will be burned. Your belief systems, how you've been responding to your emotions, how you've been responding to your thoughts. You have to understand why you do the things that you do to actually get the real remedy and resolution. And then you have to be willing to change it and go forth and make steps towards living a life of devotion, and that realizing this pattern is here for you to use, for you to reclaim your gifts and to realize how powerful you really are. Because man's vitality, like we talked about in the beginning, is centered in his loins. And if you want to control an entire family, just go there. That's what you alluded to in this part of our conversation of, you're viewing it as the devil will go to where the iron is mostly, hot. It's like, absolutely. You just proved my point in your way of looking at it. It's all, we're speaking the same language, right?
One or two other things I wanted to ask about just before we wrap, because this is things you're also big on. You mentioned earlier, we talked very briefly about pattern recognition. And so I was curious, do you find that pattern recognition is with a natural trait that some people have and some don't, or is it a skill that can be developed? And kind of following that would be how people can take control of those patterns and really, instill good patterns in their life and break the bad ones.
Well, patterns in general, I view as just pattern. I think it's both. I think we can learn to do anything. And then I think some are more gifted as well. But before you give someone else your own taste of your own food, you have to taste your own first, right? So in order to address other people's patterns, you have to be willing to address your own, right? Before you look at the thorn in someone else's eye, you have to address the telephone pole in yours. And I think that's where a lot of the truth comes from, and the ability to do that, because you've addressed shame in your aspect of yourself, and you've been able to display yourself shamelessly. That creates integrity, and that creates vulnerability, that creates safety. So I think anyone can do that. Thank you for opening up the space and giving me the opportunity to speak on your platform. And I hope this was valuable for you and your listeners. So for you as listeners, if you want to know where to find me, you can go to my Instagram at Mitchell Lima. That's there. And I'm also a part of a collective men's coaching group called the Radical Collective. So you can find me there as well. So, and we also have our own Radical Collective podcast as well, that you can also check out there in our bio. So yeah, much love, man. Peace.
And that concludes episode 20 of the Operation Paragon podcast. If you resonated with Mitchell's message today, feel free to check out the resources he mentioned, both from him directly and the Radical Collective more broadly. Thank you for listening or watching wherever you are. And until next time, remember that greatness is within your reach.